Well, it's about 1 o'clock. We'll get started here. Hello. What we'll do today is just kind of review where we are at in the course as far as due dates and everything goes. So ideally you would have gotten the cell and the genetic edge and advantage done already. I know a lot of you guys didn't get a chance to tackle them yet, so that's fine. You can still work on those, but do get caught up because each week will be something else due. If you get these done by Friday, I think that's plenty of time. So technically the date is the same as the discussion posts on here. So I apologize that it says different things in different places. So if you're late on something, just get it done, keep plugging away. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to dock you late points because I know that the dates are different, but they are correct in Davis Advantage and also out here on the calendar. So all of that stuff is what I call jumping through hoops. All those assignments, jumping through hoops. Because if you look at the CID and syllabus, really the bulk of your grade are those darn exams. The exams. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, how to hack those exams. So what I was showing was out on the Davis Advantage website. I clicked on the assignments tab, and right now it's displaying the Advantage assignments, and you can see the due dates are just all right here in this column. So technically last night, cell injury and genetic basis were due for the Advantage. And then if you click over on the edge, those were also due. If you didn't get them done, just don't worry about it. Go ahead and get those done. What did you guys think of those edge assignments? Those were pretty terrible from what I could see. Like the questions, it's basically questions. With those edge questions, what that's kind of trying to do, I'm not a big fan of it, but it's trying to teach you how to answer these types of exam questions. And these are the type of questions that health sciences loves. Last year, the year before, well, 2019, I studied for and took 6 certification exams in 6 weeks. And so I have a ton of letters behind my name now. I'm a certified emergency nurse. I'm a certified ICU nurse. I'm a board certified psychiatric mental health nurse. The reason I did that whole project was sarcastically. I was doing it sarcastically because all the letters after your name do not mean a thing as when it comes to what kind of a nurse you're going to be. How good of a nurse, how good of a rad tech or a surgical first assist. The letters don't mean anything. The only thing those letters prove or show is how good of a test taker you are. And that's true of the NCLEX for RN school. So a lot of you guys are in the RN program. When you get done with this whole degree, what you're paying for, 2 years of college education, what you're paying for is the ability to pass an exam. That's all that we're trying to prepare you to do. You're not going to be a great nurse. That has nothing to do with how well you take tests. So the edge assignment to me, It makes me crazy a little bit. But on the other hand, it is going to prepare you for that big test at the end, whether it's the surgical first assist or whatever it might be. So that's my philosophy. It's dumb. I hate it. We need a better system, but it's what we got right now. We've been doing testing in this fashion for about 75 years in the United States, but there's a big push to get away from it. So if you're just now starting the RN program, by the time you're ready to test, what year is this? This is 2021. They were hoping to roll out what's called the next generation NCLEX exam by this year. The pandemic has bumped it back, but still probably by 2022 or 2023, it won't be multiple choice style questions. It'll be much more experiential based, where it'll still be on a computer, but the idea is that you'll walk into the room, you see the patient, now what are you gonna do? And they're gonna try to test on more of what nurses actually do at the bedside. Nurses don't do multiple choice questions in the hospital. Nurses really don't do math in the hospital. In all the different programs, there's tons of math questions throughout the programs, but we really don't do math at the bedside even. You take care of people. You turn them, you change their dressing on their backside. You suction their ventilator. You get them a fresh glass of water. That's what nurses do. We save lives. We recognize that you're going down the tubes. You're FTD. That's medical abbreviation. FTD stands for fixin' to die. And we can see that from across the room. Nurses can. It's like, that guy fixin' to die. And we do something about it. The field of artificial intelligence is something I've been fascinated with, because we're trying to get computers and robots to be smarter than people, smarter than the bedside nurse. And one thing we found out, which we'll talk a little bit about today, is the computers can't compete with the bedside nurse, because we can assess things using our sense of smell, our hearing, our nervous system. Anyway, I don't know if that answers any questions or not, or did I just go off on a completely irrelevant tangent? That could be. Sometimes I've been known to do that. What I do want to show you, though, something I threw up just now on Canvas. So do pay attention to the announcements that come from this class. They will bump right into your email. Did anybody get an announcement just right before class? Did you see that? If you have Canvas, the app on your phone, I think that's a great way to stay connected and not miss announcements. When you get going full bore in whatever program, you'll find that you're getting just crazy amounts of announcements and messages. It's really hard to keep organized. I use the Canvas app. It seems to help me. And then it also bumps right over to my email. So, but the announcement that I posted just now, we're going to talk about it just a little bit. It's called the Exam 1 Active Learning Questions. And it's just a PDF. I am not allowed technically to post an exam review. So if anybody asks, this is not an exam review, but it really is. It's really actually an exam review, but I called it active learning questions. That way I won't get in trouble. But basically there's about 20 questions on here. And I would highly recommend that what I would probably do is just save this and just type right in here or print it out and answer each of those questions prior to the exam. I guess the Zoom is in the way here. So question number 1, what is the sodium potassium pump for? So what she said here on campus was the fluid regulation. And that is a good answer. Water follows salt. Water follows salt. And sodium is just salt. And I see another thing to know about the sodium potassium pump is ATP. ATP is what powers it. ATP powers it. Something like 50 to 80% of the ATP that is made by your mitochondria serves one purpose only, and that's to power the sodium potassium pump. So if for whatever reason our mitochondria stop with their energy production, that's what ATP is, it's just energy, then our sodium potassium pump fails and our cells are going to die. Under the section 1 module, I did throw the pre-canned chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 PowerPoints. And we're going to just talk through at least chapter 1 and 2 today real quickly. If you are at home and you want to follow along, or you could print these, it's kind of a nice way to review some of the content. For you guys here, I did make copies. I won't usually do that, but so we'll power through a few of those PowerPoints, and then at 2 o'clock we'll break up and start looking at that exam review. How's the reading going?
It's a lot.
It's a lot, isn't it? I read through the genetics chapter yesterday, and I was asking myself as I read it, how much of this content does a nurse need to know? There's 40 pages or so, 40 pages in chapter 3. And I took those 6 certification exams. In 2019, there's not a single genetics question on any of those. So I would say skim that chapter 3. There's going to be a couple questions on the exam. I did point those specific questions out on that exam review guide. But man, that chapter is written for somebody with a PhD in genetics.
It's extremely dense.
Yes, it's very dense. It's crazy. I think it's neat. It's fascinating, but do you need to know it to take care of people? No, there's nothing on there that you need to know to take care of people. The way I learned genetics, I'll show you the way I started digging into genetics. So if you are interested in genetics, one thing I didn't mention about myself is I'm a biohacker, which means I'm always quantifying things. I currently have 2 fitness trackers on my right arm and 1 on my left arm. And I'm always tracking different things. One thing that I did do is called 23andMe. If you're interested and you have $100 laying around that you don't have anything to throw that money away, Ed. You can have your own DNA tested. I'll show you what mine looks like. The reason I do like 23andMe, I did this when I started teaching patho because of chapter 3 in this book is too overwhelming. Man, how am I ever gonna, as a teacher, how am I ever gonna learn this stuff? So I paid $100, I think it was $100 or something like that. And they just give you all kinds of reports. One report I got was called the Ancestry report, and it tells me where my family comes from. It can track your genetics on your mother's side for the last 60,000 years or so. It can track the genetics on your father's side for the last 120,000 years. So health report. So each of these in 23andMe are also very confusing, but they'll explain it to you.
I actually found out that I was part Russian through one of these, but I did the ancestry.
You did the ancestry one.
Yeah. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think probably on the homepage, if you don't pay for it, you could click through some of those tutorials. That's what I like about it, is they have lots of tutorials explaining DNA. My health reports, one thing about me is I'm a carrier for cystic fibrosis. Which I kind of knew because I had some cousins who died from it. But what that means is if my wife is a carrier, we have a 25% chance of having kids with cystic fibrosis. So how much can genetics tell us about our own health, though? That's the million-dollar question. When the Human Genome Project first was developed, we thought that once we mapped the human genome, we would have the answer to every health problem that humankind suffers from. The mapping of the human genome took about a full decade, and the government financed it heavily. Billions of dollars we spent to map the human genome. The reason it took a full decade and why we hadn't mapped it was really because of computer processing power. Computers until early 2000 weren't fast enough to process that much data. What I just pulled up here is the National Institute of Health Human Genome Project, which chapter 3 does talk about. So in 1988, they first set the goal to do it. So around the 1990s is when they really dug in deep. So how much do your genes affect your health? What we discovered immediately after we mapped the entire human genome is that your genetics don't really have a lot to do with your health today. With your health today. What does influence your health is a whole nother field which has since developed called epigenetics. EPI genetics. Epigenetics. As it turns out, all of your DNA can change. And it changes based on the food that you eat. Some things that are potent toxins to the human organism profoundly alter your genes. And an example is alcohol. Alcohol is a profound epigenetic modulator. It literally changes how your cells work. Other things that are potent epigenetic modifiers, they change your DNA. Things like lead in the drinking water, dirty air. Dirty air has a profound epigenetic influence. And we can study, we can track mental illness, we can track how many people are psychotic or suicidal in this city based on the drinking water and the air quality. We can correlate air quality in any city in the world and map out exactly how many antipsychotic medications are prescribed in that city. Because if you're breathing dirty air, it's changing your DNA. And that's called epigenetic changes. So we're just barely scratching the surface scientifically on what that even means. Another thing that we found out when we mapped the human genome is that most of the DNA and RNA in your body right now is not even human. Most. If we were to take all of the DNA and RNA out of you right now and weigh it, and just weigh it, what percentage do you suppose is human and what percentage is not? Any guesses? 2% human? We're not entirely sure. Most scientists will say 50% is human. Up to 90% is foreign. It depends. Anywhere between 10 and 50% are human. And what it seems to depend on is what time of day it is and whether or not you've had your daily bowel movement yet. Because right before you poop, 90% of the DNA in your body is not human. And then right after you poop, it gets down to about 50%. So what that means is most health and illness is not dictated by the human genome at all. It's dictated by the bacterial genome and the viral genome living in your body. This is another example of a test that I've done. If anyone ever asks me, how should I eat? How should I eat? What's good for me? I usually, if you have some money to spend, send them over to Biome. Biome is pretty interesting because they are analyzing the microbiome, which is the DNA and RNA of all the bacteria and viruses that live mostly in your gut.
It's a new trending diet, actually. They call it the microbiome diet. It's supposed to pretty much clean out your gut. It's all about gut health.
Yeah. And I would say Viome is starting to get this way a little bit. You do have to be careful because we're getting just this very fledgling, brand new cutting edge science, and then people are running with it. And so my caution would be the science isn't quite there yet. Even with Viome, this company, they have a proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm that analyzes your gut bacteria. And then they have all these recommendations. I always take their recommendations a little bit with a grain of salt. But I downloaded this entire data set to my computer because I wanted to try to fiddle with it. And it took something like 8 hours to download. It's that much data. Because what is DNA? DNA is simply data. It's like the computer programming for your body. It's essentially what DNA is. This data set is insanely big. And there's so many tens of thousands of bacteria that we have no idea right now which ones are healthy and which ones are not. But with analyzing your gut bacteria, we can predict or tell you if you're diabetic. We can tell you if you are obese or not. Probably the biggest study happened in Australia maybe 10 years ago when we very first started to do organ transplantation. I call it organ transplantation, but it's actually called fecal transplantation, fecal transplant. If you've got arthritis or joint pain, if you have anxiety or depression, if you have some dementia setting in, maybe some Parkinson's disease, as it turns out, your gut bacteria is probably responsible for that. If you have obesity and metabolic syndrome, which 60 to 80% of Americans have, your gut bacteria is to blame for that. This study in Australia, what happened is there was a daughter, I believe she was in her 20s, and she had one of the inflammatory bowel diseases, I can't remember which one, like Crohn's disease maybe. And her mom did not have that problem. And so what the doctors did is they had mom poop in a cup, basically, and they inserted the fecal material from the mother into the daughter. The new microbiome completely healed her inflammatory bowel disease. And then a very interesting thing happened. The daughter was extremely skinny and a little bit underweight, in fact. The mom was obese. Within 6 months of receiving the bowel fecal transplant, the daughter was also obese and also developing type 2 diabetes. Our microbiome dictates our current health. Every hospital in town now does fecal transplants. And so that's something that gastroenterology does all the time. And they're doing it for not just bowel problems, but any autoimmune disorder, which a lot of our mental health problems are probably an autoimmune disorder. Anyway, so DNA, that was basically a summary of chapter 3. DNA is fascinating, and it definitely applies to your life today. So do try to read that chapter, but just know that as an RN or a rad tech on the floor, you're not going to use any of that information. I think it can have a profound impact on your own health, though.
I have a question about that. So then what do probiotic drinks play?
I'll repeat the question. I'm just making sure my Zoom is still working. So what the question here was, what role do probiotics play? Probiotics are live bacteria, and what we are trying to do with probiotics is repopulating your gut with healthy bacteria. And so when I take students to any nursing unit at any hospital, we give probiotics to almost every single patient every day now. One of the problems with the probiotics, though, is we're not sure which strains of bacteria are good. We're not positive which ones are good. And the other thing with probiotics is it's very difficult to change your gut biome. And so what I mean by that is if you take an expensive probiotic, you're probably wasting your money, because those bacteria will die without the proper food source. Bacteria have to eat as well. The one that we give in the hospital all the time is called Culturelle. That's the brand. And I think that we use this brand because it was FDA approved. So if any of you guys work in a nursing home, you probably give Culturelle all the time if you pass pills. Do you pass pills? Yeah. Culturelle, probiotic. So do they help? Potentially, they could be very helpful. But here's the kicker. If you're taking a probiotic, you really have to start thinking about what food you are feeding those bacteria. Because if your microbiome is all messed up, it's because you're feeding the wrong bacteria. The standard American diet, the SAD diet, I call it, standard American diet, tends to feed the wrong bacteria. The food that the probiotics eat are called prebiotics. Prebiotics. So if you ever see a bottle, if you go to Walmart later today, you'll probably see 100 bottles of probiotics, probably 50 bottles on the shelves at Walmart of prebiotics. The prebiotics are the food for the probiotics. The prebiotics are what the bacteria eat. For a much bigger bang for your buck is to look at what you regularly eat. If you regularly eat something, maybe that's unhealthy, like Twinkies. Do they still make Twinkies anymore? You know what I'm talking about? Those little yellow, spongy, heavenly bites of deliciousness, Twinkies. Twinkies are feeding the wrong bacteria, and you will develop type 2 diabetes if you eat too many of those. So Twinkies in that case would be a prebiotic. It's the food that the probiotic, which is a fancy word for your gut bacteria, the food that they eat. Did that answer your question? I'm going to quickly hand out the PowerPoint. We'll blaze through chapter 1, chapter 2 really quickly. For you guys at home, those PowerPoints, again, they're under modules. And then section 1 module, PowerPoints chapter 1, 2, and 3. Cell structures. This one slide and this photo is also in your book. Is really fascinating once you start digging into what each of these cell structures do. I remember when I first was exposed to this picture was when I took AMP, Anatomy and Physiology, which some of you guys might have already taken. I can't remember. I know I asked you last week. It's kind of boring. It is very boring initially, but once I started digging into the research into how each different organelle potentially impacts my own health, it started changing how I viewed this picture, because every single one of these organelles has an impact on how you're feeling today. For example, mitochondria, those are the powerhouse of the cells. The mitochondria are the powerhouses. They provide all the energy. When we talk about energy, we're really talking about ATP. And the primary thing that ATP does, most ATP is used for that sodium-potassium pump. One way that your mitochondria could be impacted is by smoking. If you smoke cigarettes, researchers have recognized what's called a mitochondrial asphyxiation at the cellular level. And this drawing is not really drawn to scale. You could potentially have hundreds of mitochondria in any given cell. But if you smoke cigarettes, there's actually a film of crap coating each mitochondria. And that film is slowly suffocating each mitochondria. And so if your mitochondria aren't working up to snuff, you're going to have symptoms. What might those symptoms be? Well, a common symptom is low energy. If you think about it, mitochondria make energy. They are the powerhouse of the cell. If you're coating them with a sticky film of tar from smoking, you'll have low energy, which often looks like depression. And so mitochondria definitely impact your health and how you feel today. The other interesting factoid about mitochondria is they're not human. Essentially, what happened 1 million years ago when the earth was covered with oceans is these single cell little microbes floating in the oceans. They could not survive on the planet Earth because Earth has this extremely toxic, lethal gas in our atmosphere. And that gas is called oxygen. Oxygen is extremely toxic and lethal to most single cell organisms. Mitochondria at one point in time were their own distinct single cell organism that evolved to use oxygen. Somewhere along the line, millions of years ago, Mitochondria figured out how to take this extremely toxic gas in the atmosphere and use it. And once they figured that out, other cells floating in the oceans sucked those mitochondria in and incorporated them into their cell. And so now it's called an organelle. So in the human cell, the mitochondria is an organelle. It has different DNA than the rest of your cell. That's how we know it's not human. That's also how we can track your maternal genetics. We use the mitochondrial DNA because your mitochondrial DNA only comes from your mother. The male DNA in the sperm is all, from the mitochondria, is all disintegrated during conception, basically. So maternal DNA is through the mitochondria. Some evolutionary scientists believe that the reason the oceans are salty, is because of the mitochondria and their ability to use oxygen to create what is called the sodium-potassium pump. Potassium is the primary intracellular ion, meaning it's inside the cell. Sodium is primarily outside the cell. The primary extracellular ion. Potassium inside, sodium outside. We think that's why the oceans are salty. A couple other structures on this slide which are pretty interesting. The nucleus, that's where the DNA resides. And what does DNA really do? All it really is doing, its purpose is to code instructions, just like computer software programming. The instructions that the DNA give, the end product, are proteins. So the DNA tells the cell what proteins to make. And there's a whole process where it goes through the rough endoplasmic reticulum and does its magic, but the output, the final output, is a protein of some kind. We give those names, those proteins names, if we know what they do. And examples would be all of your hormones and your different neurotransmitters and chemicals in your body that do stuff. If we know what they do, we give them a name. So those are the cell structures. Let's see if it lets me. Each one does something very interesting. The plasma membrane is lining the cell. It's semi-permeable. Disruption of the plasma membrane affects cell functioning. On the outer surface of the plasma membrane are what are called glycoproteins, which are known as antigens. What those antigens allow is self versus non-self recognition. The antigen is what the immune system then uses to detect whether or not this is a foreign bacteria that needs attack or whether it's your own cell. One of the problems that we have with the coronavirus, COVID-19, is that your immune system recognizes the coronavirus as a threat. So your white blood cells get all angry and they try to attack it. The problem with people who tend to die from COVID is their own body, their own white blood cells, which are part of the immune system, attack not only the COVID, the virus, but start attacking their own body cells. This especially happens in the lungs. So when your own immune system starts attacking your own cells, we call it all kinds of things. Autoimmune disorder. In the ICU, the word that we give is ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. What's really happening is your own white blood cells are attacking your own lungs, attacking your lung tissue. So antigens are very important for the immune system to recognize what is you and what is foreign. The sodium-potassium pump requires ATP. It pumps 3 sodium ions out and 2 potassium ions in. And like you said, it does play a part in maintaining fluid volume. Requires ATP. I'm just skipping through these slides really quickly because at 2 o'clock we're going to break into groups and, oh man, that's only 2 minutes from now. Well, I talked about the mitochondria. One thing to know, aerobic metabolism. That means oxygen. Oxygen is being used. During aerobic metabolism, your cells generate 34 ATP. So the mitochondria, when we have enough oxygen, generate 34 ATP. Now that number really doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know how much energy 1 ATP is, but what does mean something is notice anaerobic metabolism, which means no oxygen, only generates 2 ATP. So we went from 34 all the way down to 2. You can try this at home later if you want. Go for a run, but run faster than your lungs can keep up with, which for me isn't very fast. If I'm running really slow, I'm breathing really hard. If you're jogging and you're able to keep up a conversation with your jogging partner, you're probably in aerobic metabolism. Your lungs are able to provide enough oxygen. If you're running so fast that you can't talk to your running partner, most likely you have bumped into anaerobic metabolism, which means now your cells aren't getting oxygen. And so now you're only generating 2 ATP. Then tomorrow you're going to be super sore because you build up what's called lactic acid as a byproduct of anaerobic metabolism. So let's take a 10-minute break. Any questions up to this point? Anybody on Zoom or? I will see you back at 2:10.
So when you were talking about that DNA stuff, that test that I did was telling me like what I was more susceptible to, I guess. Like it said that like I'm more susceptible to being like anemic and type 2 diabetes and all these different things. You don't think that it determines that? Like you think it's all about?
It definitely does have, I was exaggerating probably a bit.
Well, I was just getting my hopes up. I'm like, oh, maybe I won't end up with these when I'm 50 years old.
Well, like I'm a high risk for type 2 diabetes as well. One of the interesting things about epigenetic changes is that we tend to pass them down to our children. And so my grandpa, he's a dairy farmer in western Nebraska, and he ate terrible. He ate the standard American diet, which at the time, we believed that grain and carbohydrates were in some way healthy. He grew wheat on his farm. He had type 2 diabetes the last couple decades of his life. So those epigenetic changes, though, because of how crappy my grandparents ate, were passed down genetically to my parents, and then we can track some of those changes to the third generation. And we're an example, an area that we're really looking hard at that is autism. Why are there? We're in a current pandemic of autism spectrum disorder, the skyrocketing cases. Why is that? It seems like one answer might be not even how the mom ate, but how her mom ate. So genetics, there are some diseases that are 100% genetic, and Huntington's disease is an example. And so in that chapter 3, there's a few, they have a few diseases they list out and explain exactly how hereditary they are. But of all the pandemics we're currently in, we are currently in about 20 pandemics. We have a pandemic of suicide. Suicide rates are skyrocketing. We have a pandemic of the autism spectrum disorder. We have a pandemic of Alzheimer's and dementias. Those rates are skyrocketing. We have a pandemic of obesity, 60-80% in the United States alone. We have a pandemic of type 2 diabetes, which correlates with the obesity. Hypertension correlates with the obesity. All of those pandemics seem to be related to how we eat.
I've been to their backyard and in their garden.
Yeah, healthy.
Now eating just like highly processed foods.
Are you guys on Zoom? Are you able to hear what we're saying when I'm not talking?
No,
Yeah.
kind of.
Kind of. I apologize
It's
for that.
kind of wishy-washy. It depends on where they are in the room.
Oh, I wonder what the answer. I need probably a second mic. I wonder. Maybe next time I'll look around for a mic I can pass around. But what we're going to do now is go through this exam review. We'll spend the next half an hour, 45 minutes doing that. So what can't remember if I'm sharing my screen. Nope. Let's share my screen. What we were talking about that you guys couldn't hear was just the rates of different diseases that a lot of the pandemics we're currently in seem to be related to how we eat. And
Is the exam all multiple choice questions?
the exam is not 100% multiple choice. There's some fill in the blank. There's at least one that is a matching, where you have like 5 or maybe even 10 definitions, and you have to match those. That one, let me share my desktop real quick. Can you guys on Zoom hear me okay? I switched my microphone.
Yep.
Yes.
So there's at least one question that is a like a drag and drop, I believe, where you have, I think, like 10 terms and you have to drag them to the correct definition. Those type of questions are, they're not super difficult because you have all the words and all the definitions there. But that's the way to study for that one question are these 3 med term decks here. This is under the section 1 module. These are like little flashcards somebody made. So I'd encourage you to click through these at least once or twice. And if you don't know what some of the words mean, make a note of that. It's like hetero means other, different, kind of like medical terminology. There's at least one question that is a select all that apply. So you might have 5 answers and you have to select a couple of the answers that are correct. 90% of the questions are just multiple choice though. Are you guys ready to answer questions? I would encourage you to take notes as we go around the room. That'll save you some time later when you're doing your exam 1 late night cramming session. You take notes. So what I'm going to try to do is I changed the mic to the webcam mic. So you two are on camera. Do you want to go first? Did you find the answer to? If you want to tell us what number and.
Question number 2, and it's cilia.
So question number 2 is cilia, she said.
Number 3, it's a deficiency in lysosomal enzymes.
Can you guys hear her okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around the room we go. Do.
Question 23. T lymphocytes have a decreased ability to recognize and attack antigens.
So question what, 23?
Yeah.
T lymphocytes have a decreased ability to recognize
And attack the antigens.
and attack the antigens. T lymphocytes are an important part of the immune system. What was yours?
I had 5, and I think it's hypoxia.
So number 5, she said hypoxia. What was the question?
A client is diagnosed with a condition in which the brain cells cannot withstand low oxygen delivery long enough for cell reversible changes to happen. Which condition is the client exhibiting?
Hypoxia. That sounds right to me. So there's another word that's very similar called ischemia that you'll see sometimes as well. Ischemia is at the cellular level, basically part of hypoxia. When you're hypoxic, you're not getting enough oxygen. And then ischemia means that oxygen's not getting clear down there at the cellular level.
I had 24, which age-related changes in the respiratory system are responsible for an increased susceptibility to pneumonia in older clients? kind of have a longer answer, but decline in lung capacity, the alveoli can lose their shape and become baggy, diaphragm becomes weaker, and a decline in their immune function.
So really talking about the elderly and why,
Science, yeah.
yeah. So as we get older, things start falling apart. I'm gonna keep trucking around the room here.
I had a question 7, which condition describes the increase in size of a weightlifter's muscle? And then that'd be physiological hypertrophy.
Physiological hypertrophy, which is considered a good thing for the most part. Hypertrophy means muscles are getting bigger. It's pathological, usually in the case of heart failure. We see that heart muscle getting big, and that's bad.
I had number 8. So what is weakened area in the wall of the cerebral artery located on the circle of Willis? And I couldn't find the answer. Sorry.
So the circle of Willis is arteries in your brain. And maybe you guys can't even see me. I don't know how to. So the circle of Willis is the circular arterial system in your brain. And we tend to call a weakened spot a berry aneurysm. And that's one reason I put that on that thing, because it's hard to find. Berry, as in BERRY, a berry aneurysm. And one of the thoughts is if you have high blood pressure for years and years, you can weaken the arterial wall. And the problem with a berry aneurysm is it can pop. What do you suppose would happen if an artery in your brain explodes? Pops. What signs and symptoms would the patient have?
Swelling in the head.
Swelling in the head. We call that cerebral edema. They always present with, quote, the worst headache of my life. And then they die. That's the way that goes. Often the presenting symptom is simply death, because you're a goner. You pop an artery in your brain, you're a goner. So if you make it to the hospital alive, it's the worst headache of my life. That's what they complain. And it's an artery that kind of balloons out, called an aneurysm. And then if it pops, you're bleeding to death in your brain, though. So it happens very quickly. Anyway, next question.
I had question number 9. What is an example of hyperplasia? I got a keloid, and it's usually formed by healing when cells accumulate.
So a keloid is an example of hyperplasia. That's a good example. Not everyone gets keloid formation. That is something that's mostly genetic, whether or not you form keloids when you get a cut. So, you guys on Zoom, who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, Nicole.
So I had number 17. What are the stages of inflammation? And vascular permeability, cellular chemotaxis, and systemic responses?
Do you want to say that again slowly? I think people are writing it down.
Sorry.
This would
Okay.
be something to write down if you're not writing down.
Okay, vascular permeability, cellular chemotaxis, systemic responses.
Cellular permeability. And then you said chemotaxis. Anybody know what that word means?
I read about it, but I forgot.
Chemotaxis. Chemo just means chemical,
Chemicals in your body.
and taxi is not a good word anymore. We should call it Uber. Chemo Uber is just moving around. So what happens, a good example would be a sprained ankle. You sprain your ankle and you start get swelling at that area because of the permeability. Fluid starts leaking out. And then white blood cells start rushing to the area. White blood cells do, platelets do. That's called chemotaxis, when they start rushing to the area, your immune system. Who would like to go next?
I can.
And who's talking?
This
Brandon?
is, yes.
Okay. What question did you have?
Number 12, what are the stages of Selye's stress response theory? And I have as alarm, resistance, and exhaustion.
Alarm, resistance, and exhaustion.
Yes.
Alarm stage, and then the resistance stage, and then the exhaustion stage. A common question that I see, I actually have this question for my mental health nursing students, is when you start college, what stage are you in? Usually the alarm stage initially. The alarm stage is when your body starts revving up because you're under stress. You have stress. The resistance stage is the body trying to resist any bad outcomes from that. The exhaustion stage is when your immune system is overwhelmed and you usually get sick at that point in time. So studying for final exams, if you get sick at that point in time, because you're pulling all these late night, pounding back the Red Bulls to study, the exhaustion stage, and you tend to get sick, get a cold. That's often a test question, at least in the nursing program. What stage are you in? You're in the exhaustion stage. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next. I had number 15. So the question wasn't clear. Are you wanting just normal wound healing stages, or are you asking for the intention, the primary, secondary, and tertiary intention wound stages of healing, or just the normal wound stages of healing?
Probably that primary. Well, I don't remember now. What was your answer that you came up with for the first, not the primary, secondary? Did you come up with something different?
So what I came up with, was homeostasis or stasis, inflammation, profiliation, and remodeling. And remodeling is the last stage of when, I guess, the wound is closed up, if you will.
I'm pretty sure that's what the exam, say that again. Could you say it slowly so people could write it down? What was number one?
So the first stage is the homeostasis, where
Homeostasis.
yeah, so go back. Inflammation,
inflammation,
proliferation, and then remodeling.
so proliferation
Yes.
and remodeling. Who would like to go next?
I'll go. Oh, you can go ahead.
I had number 10 asked what was Marfan's disease. It's a inherited disorder that affects the connective tissue. And it makes the people have a tall, thin frame with long arms, legs, and fingers. And it affects their heart, eyes, blood vessels, and bones.
Marfan's. Marfan. You'll hear Marfan's a lot throughout your program. It's not super common. Abraham Lincoln, we think, had Marfan's. Tall, skinny, and usually has joint pain because it's a connective tissue problem. The last kid I took care of with Marfan's, he was 19. And when a 19-year-old presents to the ER front desk and says, I'm having chest pain, usually as ER nurses, we're like, 19-year-old with chest pain, probably not having a heart attack yet. He's too young to be having a heart attack. But then when he added, oh, and I have Marfan's. Chest pain plus Marfan's is a bad situation because Marfan's can affect your heart, but it can especially affect your aorta. The connective ligaments that tie your aorta together, they can fray. And so Marfan's, what they tend to die from very commonly is a ruptured aortic aneurysm. So this is an aneurysm similar to the Berry aneurysm in your brain. For Marfan's, it tends to be in their chest, and it's an aortic aneurysm. And so a Marfan's patient complaining of chest pain is a run, don't walk emergency. We got to get that aorta fixed immediately. Who would like to go next?
I will. I had number 11. What is a karyotype? And it's an organized arrangement of all the chromosomes in the cell.
An organized arrangement of all the chromosomes. If that sounds confusing, what a karyotype really is a black and white photograph. Because when they first discovered DNA 100 years ago, they took pictures of the chromosomes and they would publish those pictures in a textbook. And that was called a karyotype. Karyotype. Who would like to go next?
I can go next.
I don't. Oh, well, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Question 14, how does sepsis develop? Usually starts with an infection, and then instead of sending the infection fighting chemicals to the infection source, it sends it throughout the body and causes like widespread inflammation and starts interfering with your blood vessels and clotting.
Did you guys get that? Sepsis usually starts with an infection, and then the body's immune system freaks out. freaks out. If there was only one disease in this whole class to truly understand, I would vote for sepsis. If you work in a hospital, this is what you will do all day, every day. Take care of the septic patient. With sepsis, we're always looking for the source of infection. Where did they get their infection from? And the number one and number two sources of infection that we see, number one, pneumonia. Somebody gets a pneumonia in their lungs. As soon as that bacteria hits their bloodstream, they are now septic. Number two, urinary tract. People with a UTI, urinary tract infection, that bacteria hits the bloodstream, they are now septic. And what actually kills sepsis patients, which is the leading cause of death in hospital worldwide, sepsis, what actually kills people is their own immune system. It's the overwhelming immune system response. So white blood cells start attacking the lungs, the blood vessels. Any questions about sepsis? Who would like to go next?
I can go then. My question was, sorry, gotta pick up my note, was number 18, which was both a reservoir and a vector may be involved in infection transmission, and which does the healthcare professional recognize as a vector? First things first, I kind of defined what a reservoir and a vector was. A reservoir is basically what the habitat is that the virus or bacteria grows in. And the vector is typically like arthropods, which are like mosquitoes and ticks. So basically it's infections that are transmitted by a bite from like a mosquito or a tick, and then you get sick from it.
So vector, whenever I see the word vector, I just think of bugs, either a mosquito or a tick, usually, which is a huge problem worldwide. Vector-borne illnesses like the Zika virus, West Nile virus, malaria. So mosquito-borne illnesses. The mosquito is called the vector. Who would like to go next? I haven't been keeping track of.
I can go. I had 22. Which theory of aging explains apoptosis of the ovary? And in the book, we are just referring to physiological apoptosis during menopause, but the word theory in there kind of threw me off, and so I Googled it to double check and came up with all this weird different theory stuff. So if that is supposed to be the answer, I do not know, but otherwise I just have menopause.
Otherwise what?
Otherwise, I'm just going with menopause because that's what it's referring to in the book.
Menopause. I think that sounds good.
I just said the because it says what theory, that kind of threw me off. So I Googled it, and then all this weird stuff came up on Google about different theories, like actual theories, and I was like, okay, we'll just go with menopause.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick. I'm gonna go investigate in the actual exam and see what were they talking about. You guys can't see my I think menopause makes sense to me, but I wonder if they're
Yeah, it makes sense. Like I said, it's just the word theory in there kind of threw me off.
Yeah, you don't think of menopause as being a theory.
Right.
Okay, so what they want, and I did not know this, a little bit different. It is a theory
Oh,
called the programmed aging of the cell theory. Programmed aging of the cell theory. The idea is that cells have a programmed schedule built into their DNA for aging and degeneration. So we think the ovary has a programmed time span of function after which it undergoes apoptosis. And I honestly did not know that. It's what they were looking for. Apoptosis is a word that you'll want to know. Apoptosis will show up several times, and that programmed cell death or kind of normal cell death. Apoptosis sounds bad, sounds horrible. What? Cells dying, that sounds terrible. It's actually considered a good thing for the most part, because if we didn't have apoptosis, we would die of cancer at a very young age. And so your body is continually rebuilding itself, killing off cells, creating new ones. So apoptosis is programmed cell death. Who would like to go next? Has everyone gone? I honestly don't know. All righty. I'm going to assume everyone has gone. Any questions so far?
Nope.
No. What time are we out of here? Let me know.
3:25.
3:25. That's what I thought. I was just checking to see if you knew. No, I'm just kidding. What I would like to just hammer through really quickly is a little bit of chapter 2. This is the PowerPoint. And again, you guys on Zoom do have these in the Canvas shell. Chapter 2, as far as PowerPoint goes, is just a bunch of terminology for the most part. Words like etiology, which is the original cause of the problem, the original cause. Some other terms, some other terminology that you'll see. Histology. Histology is when we put tissue under a microscope. So at the hospital, there's a whole department, part of the lab, that's called the histology department. I used to call it the body parts room, and I would take students to tour the body parts room. And so if you get like a leg amputated, it goes to histology department. And then the doctor looks at it under microscope and A biopsy is similar, except for usually we're using a needle to poke something. So a biopsy, they usually use a needle to get a few cells. I actually had a little spot on my face, biopsy a couple weeks ago. And what they're looking for is to see if I have skin cancer. So you get a little sample, send it to a lab, and some doctor who makes a ton of money looks through it in a microscope, the biopsy. Autopsy, that's examination of a dead person, deceased organism, called an autopsy. Pathognomic changes, just a big fancy word. I would encourage you not to use that word in everyday conversation. People will look at you like you're a know-it-all. Pathognomic. What is the patho? I would say that, patho. Unique identifying presentations. Atrophy, that's when the cells are shrinking and getting smaller. So paralysis causes shrinkage, atrophy. In fact, the human organism is designed for movement. And nothing is more lethal than lying in a hospital bed. If you lay in a bed for 24 hours, everything starts atrophying. Immediately starts atrophying. And so after even just 24 hours, your muscles have shrunk and they're weak. Have you ever broken a bone and had a cast put on? If you've ever had a cast on a broken bone, all of the muscles atrophy very quickly. So when you get your cast removed, you'll notice your arm has shrunk quite a bit smaller. The only way to prevent atrophy is to keep moving. Keep moving. And so in the hospital, no matter what surgical procedure you have, if you deliver a baby, now we get people moving as fast as possible. And so when we do our hip surgeries now, those guys are out of bed walking with physical therapy that same day. 30 years ago, if you had a baby here in the United States, they would keep you on bed rest for a week after you delivered, especially if you had a C-section. And what we found is getting people up moving as fast as possible is the most powerful thing to prevent all kinds of health problems. But preventing atrophy is the biggest thing. Hypertrophy is increasing individual cell size. So if you work out at the gym and you're lifting weights, you are trying to hypertrophy your muscles. So bench pressing or doing arm curls, you're trying to hypertrophy those muscles. That's a good thing, and we call that physiologic hypertrophy. If you have high blood pressure for 20 years and never take your high blood pressure pills, your heart muscle is working extra hard. Your heart muscle has to work extra hard to pump blood out because of that high pressure it's pumping against. That's exactly the same as weightlifting. Over 10, 20 years, that left ventricle, the left ventricle of your heart, hypertrophies. You would think that would be a good thing, right? Well, as it turns out, it's a bad thing, because the bigger your heart muscle gets, the less efficient it is. And that leads to what we call congestive heart failure. Most common cause of congestive heart failure, long-term high blood pressure that was not treated. Hypertrophy can either be good or bad. It just means an increase in the individual cell size. We talked about hyperplasia, increase in number of cells. Keloid formation is a good example of that. Some people who genetically do form keloids will actually do this on purpose, sort of scarring in decorative fashion, kind of like how in the United States we get tattoos and stuff, but keloid formation can be used culturally almost as a fashion statement in a sense. Metaplasia is a replacement of one cell type with another. An example would be GERD, which is heartburn. GERD is just gastroesophageal reflux disease. If you ever have heartburn, chest pain after eating spicy food, the cells in your esophagus can transform and change into a different cell type, which is sometimes a bad thing because it can lead to cancer. Dysplasia is deranged cellular growth. Anytime you see that word deranged, which is dysplasia, think cancer. Cancer. Oh, this is not good. The cells are getting all mixed up and deranging. It's going to turn into cancer. Neoplasia means new growth. And so this often is referring to cancer as well. Disorganized, uncoordinated, uncontrolled cell growth, a neoplasm. We often use the word tumor. Tumor. This is a picture of malignant melanoma, which is skin cancer. So if you have any spots that look like that, go get them checked out, especially if they start changing in shape and size. If we have benign neoplasms, the cells tend to resemble normal cells. They're well differentiated. Malignant cells, which are cancer, bad, they appear very different. And they are poorly differentiated cells, meaning they don't look like the part of the body we pulled them from. Do you guys have this slide? I see kind of, you don't have that slide? Huh, I wonder why. Do you guys have like a gross picture of a liver?
Yeah.
I'm on a slide called hypoxia. Do you guys have that one? Hypoxia. This is a word you'll see on the exam. Diminished oxygen to the cells. Ischemia, we tend to think of as circulation. I would say probably most nurses use those two words interchangeably, hypoxia and ischemia. Whatever the case, your cells aren't getting enough oxygen, and those cells have to bump over to anaerobic metabolism. And they can only do that for a short period of time because you're only generating 2 ATPs without oxygen. And pretty soon that cell is going to die. The ATP is responsible for that sodium potassium pump. The pump fails. What really happens then is calcium floods in, and then that's all she wrote for that cell. It's dead. It's going to die. Free radical injury. Let's talk about this slide and then we'll call it a day. Free radicals is a very interesting concept. what we're really talking about is oxygen. Oxygen. Remember I mentioned earlier today that oxygen is an extremely toxic gas, and most organisms a million years ago would die in the presence of oxygen. Well, the human body uses oxygen as a cleaning mechanism. It's part of the immune system. If you catch the COVID later today, somebody coughs when you're at Walmart, a little too close to you, you breathe in the coronavirus, your white blood cells are going to attack. They're going to try to kill that infection. How do white blood cells kill bacteria and viruses? They use cleaning agents, and those cleaning agents are free radicals, what are called reactive oxygen species. Reactive oxygen species. And there's three very common ones in the human body that are a potent part of our immune system. Three common ones. Most common is called superoxide. Superoxide. That's just an oxygen, which is O2, with a little negative above it. And the negative means there's a free electron. There's an electron space that can interact. What it does, the superoxide, is it tends to kill the cell membrane of that bacteria. Superoxide. Probably the second most common one is a cleaning agent that you have at home called hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide. Have you ever put hydrogen peroxide on a wound? My mom used to do that. Anytime I scrape my knee, she'd be like pouring this stuff on. Hydrogen peroxide comes in a brown bottle, and that is a reactive oxygen species. And it's naturally occurring in your body. Your white blood cells can squirt it out to kill bacteria. H2O2. It's the chemical name, H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. The third one is another thing that you have at home, I bet, bleach, which is the hydroxyl ion. Bleach is a reactive oxygen species. So we got superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, and bleach. Your white blood cells have those things usually in little pockets called lysosomes. Lysosomes. Do you remember way back on the PowerPoint where I was showing you pictures of that cell? I was going to see if I could pull it up real quick. I was dumb and I X'd out of it. One of the organelles I didn't really talk about are lysosomes. On the slide here, they're little green balls, they look like. So a white blood cell would have those, and they would be full of reactive oxygen species. So it comes in contact with the coronavirus, it will release those lysosomes. Those lysosomes would release the reactive oxygen species, the hydrogen peroxide, the bleach. Don't go drinking bleach if you get COVID. I think Trump even said that. He tweeted that one time. I'm just going to drink bleach. I can tell you some stories about kids I've taken care of who drank bleach. Never do it. Problem with bleach is it keeps eating away for a week or two. And so you might be fine for a while until it eats a hole right through something really important inside and you're dead. Don't drink bleach. But your body has just tiny microscopic quantities of bleach. Works great for killing bacteria. If you go to Walmart later today, I would encourage you to look at the supplement aisle and count how many antioxidants are available. How many bottles of supplements say antioxidant? What's an antioxidant doing? It's fixing the reactive oxygen species, because most of our health problems really stem from our immune system being overactive. And so people take antioxidants because it makes them feel better. It's a $1 trillion industry in the United States. If you want to get rich, I would encourage you to start a supplement business and sell antioxidants. A common antioxidant, vitamin E, vitamin C, NAC, essentially anything at Walmart. They have an entire, go to Walgreens, go to CVS Pharmacy, and almost every single pill bottle on the shelf is an antioxidant. Any questions about that? How's like a real quick and dirty chapter 1, chapter 2? Do you guys on Zoom have any questions at all?
So
How do you guys feel? We got the exam not next week, but it's coming right up, isn't it? On the 4th, February 4th.
oh, I thought it was next week. That's good to know.
Yeah, so we got a little time.
Oh.
And it's on over chapter 1 and 2.
1, 2, and 3. No, I take that back. It's section 1 and 2, I think. That doesn't make any sense. Let me go look at Canvas real quick.
I'm pretty sure the test is next week.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Is it really next week already? Oh, man.
Yeah. According to the schedule, it is.
But the sheet you gave us, it does say the date is the 4th.
It says the 4th on
So
that
it says
schedule.
week 3, I think, in the Canvas, which would be next week, but the sheet you handed out last week says it's on the 4th.
Oh,
If that makes sense.
so on the Canvas calendar, it says February 4th. So that's when I'm planning to give it.
Okay.
And for you guys that are on Zoom, I'm planning to use the Respondus lockdown browsers, and you guys, so you can definitely take it from home. You don't have to come and risk getting the COVID.
Okay.
Do you lecture after the exams?
I usually do. I'm trying to think how many questions are on that exam. Let me stop sharing my screen and I'll look, because I want to give you enough time to take the exam. So exam 1 has 37 questions. So yes, I will plan on lecturing after the exam.
Okay.
Any other questions? I think we're done for today. So if you do have any questions, just shoot me a message in my email inbox or on Canvas. And I'll plan on seeing you guys next week.
Okay, bye.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.